All right, the trial is on for Monday. Opening arguments. The jury is now selected, 6 alternates selected, so it begins. Bill Barr is watching it very closely. Of course, the former Attorney General under Donald Trump served that role under President Bush as well. Not too many who have done that. Attorney General, good to have you.
Thank you, Neil. Good to be with you.
You, for all of your problems with your former boss and all the issues that he raised in office and all the damage you argue he had done, are still supporting him over Joe Biden. That surprised you. Didn't surprise me. I know you had said before you would support the Republican ticket, and you are, but he's heading that ticket for all those warts and problems you cited. Why?
Right. Well, yeah, I'm not happy with the choice. I think this is a terrible choice for the country, but it is a choice. At the end of the day, we have to select between two different individuals, and I've said all along that I think it's my duty to pick the person I think will do the least harm to the country, and I think that to me, that's clearly Trump and a Republican administration, which I think is important. I think, getting control over the border, stopping the lawlessness in our cities, building up the strength of the United States in an ever more dangerous world, stop the avalanche of regulation that is strangling business and our technological superiority. These are critical things that have to be done, and I think that we'll get them done under a Trump administration. At the same time, I think the Biden administration is, in fact, the greater threat to democracy. I think they have a totalitarian temper. They have bought into the progressive movement, and they're trying to squelch opposition and freedom of speech.
Maybe so on all of the above, but you were also very concerned about the things you saw and witnessed and the lies you claim Donald Trump, pounded again and again. You said repeatedly that he knew well that he lost the election, the last election. And we got details on other indictments, not the one case that's happening now and getting all this attention now. I believe you had thought that was ridiculous. But you had called a lot of the information and the details on that information that came up in some of these other matters nauseating and despicable. You had said that someone who engaged in that kind of bullying about a process that is fundamental to our system and to our self-government shouldn't be anywhere near the Oval Office. I guess I have trouble squaring that.
Well, no, because I don't think Biden should be anywhere near the Oval Office. That's the fact. Everyone wants to discuss it in absolute terms and focus on the pros and cons of an individual. Fine, we can discuss the pros and cons of each individual. But at the end of the day, this is a question of comparison. It's a question of a choice, a binary choice. And I don't think either should be near the Oval Office. But if one of is going to be, there's no doubt in my mind that it's better for the country, for the Republicans to win the election.
It looks like he has a very good shot at winning. He's garnering a lot of support, even from those who are not normally big fans of his, who feel that he is being railroaded with these various cases. Do you agree with that?
I think he has a decent shot. I mean, one of the reasons I did not support him for the nomination was because I also think that he could lose this election. In fact, I think given the terrible performance of the Biden administration and his degree of unpopularity, the fact that he's only a little bit ahead, the polls show Trump only a little bit ahead, is actually not a sign of strength. I think other Republican candidates would be much more ahead. But I do think that he has an opportunity to win if he doesn't boot it.
How about getting people to serve in his administration? You said that would be a difficulty if it came to that. What did you mean by that?
Well, I think, I think most people recognize it may be hard to get people to serve in the administration, and he'll probably put a premium on people who he feels would be more subservient to him, and that's an area of concern. But at the end of the day, you have to remember, serving in his administration, I was fine with his policies.
Right.
I think his policies were good policies. My problems came with his behavior, which I found very troubling after the election, and I think I think the idea that he's going to be an autocrat and take over power like some right-wing dictator is not the threat facing our country. The threat facing our country is from the far left and the drift that's been occurring toward really a socialistic system, and one that brooks no opposition, one that cancels people, that has only one viewpoint taught in colleges, that tries to push parents out of the picture when it comes to the education of their children. It's a heavy-handed bunch of thugs, in my opinion, and that's where the threat is.
If he is, I don't want to belabor the point, but if he is Attorney General going to be someone who might want to extract revenge for the way he's been treated, or vendetta towards some Democrats have claimed. He says that's not the case, that his goal and his priority is going to be success. So we'll take him at face value for that. But do you think a cabinet or surrounding yourself with individuals who might be sycophants is up to the task of keeping that kind of behavior in check?
I think some of the people that may end up there are, and we'll see. I think an important indication will be his choice of vice president and what kind of person he picks there. I hope he picks somebody who is a strong conservative Republican and could serve as president of the United States if they had to.
But isn't the far more important post Attorney General?
That's an important post. There are a lot of important posts,
Yeah.
and we'll see what happens.
I only say it because you bucked him on a lot of those things, and I, as Attorney General, if you were compliant, it might have been a little different. I don't mean to belabor this, but I am belaboring it, so I apologize. But is there a distinction here in the type of person he chooses if he gets that far for Attorney General?
Well, I think he has some options that, people that I think he would look at favorably, who would make good attorneys general. We'll see what happens. I really can't predict who he'll pick. I'll react when I see it. But and I'm not talking about personnel in this administration, in the Biden administration, but there's all this babble about Trump being a lawless administration, and we see defying of the law on a regular basis in the Biden administration. I mean, they're not enforcing the law on the border. He's forgiving tens of billions of dollars of money owed to the United States that puts this onus on the back of hardworking taxpayers, people who are not getting these breaks. And the courts have already said that he didn't have the power to do this, and he's trying to do it before the election to buy votes. This is, to me, lawless and crass behavior.
Stepping back from all of that and given your decision, and we've gotten inklings of this from the Bush family and relatives of, President Bush, and of course, the extended family itself. They're a big bunch. And to a man or woman, they too are uniting around Donald Trump. Donald Trump often says the party is very much united around, and that would appear to be the case. But if he is convicted of any of the charges, not only in this particular trial going on, but anything going forward that might get adjudicated before the election, does that change things for you?
Well, it's 7 months. We're living in a very crazy time,
Right.
and it's hard to predict what's going to happen. I can't envision a set of circumstances where I would support Biden. He'd have to do some radical changes of his orientation for me to even conceive of that.
Even with a conviction?
Well, it depends. I mean, the thing now is a travesty. I mean, if he's convicted in New York, that thing is a travesty. It'll ultimately be overturned. That will come after the election. But in my opinion, there's no crime there at all. Okay. This is something that I'll have to look and see what the situation is in each case.
Bill Barr, I always enjoy talking to you. Thank you very much.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.